welcome to today's question time. As always, we've got a jam-packed session for you. Lot to go through, a lot happening. We are, of course, back to being locked down. You're in my house, so if you hear a lot of noise in the background, I apologise in advance. As always, my kids don't believe in being quiet. I'm banned from making any phone calls or any discussions from 8:30 to 3:30 in their school hours because apparently I'm loud, I'm noisy, and I swear too much. However, the same doesn't go for me. Unfortunately, they'll barge in. The door's just over there, so you won't see them on screen, but of course, they'll barge in, they'll make a hell of a lot of noise, and they won't care less. So I apologise in advance. I can't reach out to quickly keep pressing mute. So if you do hear a screaming, Dad, turn my iPad on, Dad, where's my doll? Just ignore it. That's not me. And this is not a Barbie doll session. So I apologise in advance. All right. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to drop in. I know we're live on Facebook, so welcome Facebook listeners. Welcome everyone on Zoom. Those of you that have joined us with Facebook, it's a good experience. Obviously, if you would like to get involved and ask your questions and be interactive, sign up and join us live on Zoom next week. You can, of course, drop any questions you've got in the comments on Facebook, and we will get back to you and answer those. Unfortunately, we can't do it live. Even when I am in the office and I do have a helper, it's just too many systems to be across. I've got a screen here and I've got a screen there that you guys can't see so that I can read all of your questions live from Zoom. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do it live from Facebook. So that's just, for those of you that are joining us, just to remind you about that. Okay, now we're going to go for a little while here, but first up, before we get into it, I want to ask everyone a question. I want to know from all of you that are new and that are joining us for the first time, what's more important? What is going to win the day? Is it information or knowledge? So just take a moment, have a think about it. Those of you that are long-time listeners, you can do it. I just saw my wife poke her head in the door and she gave me the answer. I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong. And I've quickly said, get out. All right, everyone put their finger on it. The answer is knowledge. Now, you might remember when you're at school, teachers were there about making you feel important, and they said, little Johnny, it's okay, there's no such thing as a wrong answer. Well, school's out, this is a real world, and there is a wrong answer, and the wrong answer is information. Knowledge is the right answer, and the reason why is because information in itself is just organised data about something. It's your ability to understand that information and turn it into knowledge, and more specifically, into knowledge specific for yourself, and create what we call the actionable knowledge database of what you should be doing. Now, I want to tell you a little story before we get into it. Going back to 2005, those of you that think I'm fantastic and amazing now, that was not always the case. There was a time where I had no idea what I was doing and I was running around, dazed, confused, and absorbing as much information as I could, but not turning it into knowledge. So there was a retail property. It was tenanted by a restaurant. Those of you that know anything about retail property will typically know that we have what's called a base rent plus a percentage of the restaurant's turnover. Now, effectively, that meant that the rent that property was earning came about 50% from base rent and 50% from turnover. Now, the problem with turnover rent is during the good times, it's great. Like right now, Corona, restaurants are shut. There is zero turnover, so effectively the rent would halve immediately. So you have what's called rent reviews and a market rent review. And the idea behind that is to try and get the base rent as high as you possibly can so that you're not, as a landlord, susceptible to the tenants' changes in their turnover. Now, thinking I knew what I was talking about, I had a look around, I did some research, I came up with a new market base rent and I submitted it to the tenant. Now, the tenant said that was outrageous, it was too much, it was no good. And the next step in that process was to appoint a valuer to determine and appraise what the appropriate market rental was. Now, the valuer was the preeminent retail leasing expert in Sydney at the time. And he said to me, listen, what you've got to do, you've got to withdraw this, do this, and he went a million miles at me, right? And he did that because I said that I knew what I was talking about. Now, what I took from that is he said, withdraw your offer. I didn't know what I was doing. He said, withdraw your offer. So what did I do? I withdrew our offer. Unbeknownst to me, because I just took on all that information and didn't actually know what I was doing, I made the mistake of withdrawing the offer and allowing the tenant to then accept as that market rent review the existing base rent. And the next market rent review wasn't for another 5 years. So I made a huge mistake, much like I'm sure many of you done with the amount of information there. You haven't properly understood it and you've gone and taken actions and steps based on that. And hopefully for most of you, it didn't cost as much as it did for me. This was a multi-million-dollar mistake. And I tell you what, I learned a very, very important lesson from that, which is don't pretend you know everything. Listen to the information, absorb the information, ask the questions so that you actually have knowledge about it. And if you don't understand it, then don't do it. Warren Buffett, those of you that know who he is, he has a very, very famous investing technique, which is if he doesn't understand the business, he doesn't invest in it. And that's very much about having that knowledge. He says that the risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Just like I didn't know what I was doing and I created a big mistake. Fast forward 15 years, I'm a very different person now. I now understand that concept. I now teach that. And today's session is all about helping you turn that information about what's happened in the last 7 days into knowledge by asking your questions. So today's session, we're going to go for about 30 to 40 minutes. First up, I'm going to run you through what I call the information portion of the section. I'm going to throw a ton of data at you, our favorite stories from the last 7 days, what's been happening with some of the key statistics. That'll go for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we're going to transition to the next step. We're going to close that chapter, and section 2 is what we call the knowledge portion. That's what you're all here for today. That's when we're going to take all of your questions live about what's been going on and try and turn it into knowledge for you. So ideally, either answer specifically for you or through answering other people's questions, help you gain that knowledge so you can create those steps as to what you should be doing and what it means for you specifically. And then we'll wrap up. That'll go for about 2 minutes. Those of you that are wondering what's the next steps, I'll identify what I believe you should be doing next. And hopefully everyone out there will leave today's session a hell of a lot wiser than when you started, understanding that concept between information and knowledge, and hopefully well on the path to creating your own database of actionable knowledge. Okay, so section 1, focus now. This will go for about 5 minutes. And this is where I'm going to fill you with a heap of ideas and information, but hopefully I want you to be asking us the questions in the next section. So around the country, what's been happening in the last 7 days? These are our favorite topics, and we'll run through these in a bit more detail. You'd be under a rock if you didn't realize that most of the country's in lockdown. We've got vaccine problems. We've got premiers fighting with each other. Things are all over the shop. People can't go. Kids are getting vaccines. They're not getting vaccines. Schools are open. They're not open. But the property market seems to continue to be going strong. Why is that? And you should understand why it is. Melbourne, obviously, we're focusing on our niche. We are based in Melbourne. What's going to happen with spring? We're now a week into it. We're in lockdown for the foreseeable future. Let's talk about what's going to happen there. Self-managed super funds. It's a huge pool of money. And for most of us out there, we would say, who can manage that money better than ourselves? So you might be doing a self-managed super fund. And what do you want to do? You say, I've got a truckload of money. Should I buy a residential property? Well, yes and no. We're going to run through that in detail for those of you that are thinking about it and identify some of the pitfalls. We're also going to talk about where property values in residential property sit and why it is so important that you let that become part of your key strategy. And then lastly, vacancy rates in Melbourne have moved a little bit in Resi versus Sydney. Why is this happening? Is it something you should be worried about, or is it just a short-term movement that you don't need to stress about? Okay, auction clearance results. These are what we call a lag indicator. That is, it's historical data. It's not a forecast for the future, but really, really important to understand what's been going on around the country and a great sort of insight into where things are going. So what do we see last weekend? You'll see by this number here, if I just zoom in, 67% was the national clearance rate. Not a bad result, just in isolation of understanding the facts. It's just we've probably gotten so used to seeing the high 70s that we feel this is bad. It's obviously up significantly from, I think the final clearance rate last week was about 58%, which was significantly down from what we've seen. I did run through with everyone who joined us last week and the week before why we're seeing such low clearance rates. What you'll primarily see is about 1,500 auctions, of which a third of them were here in, so 530 of them were here in Melbourne, Now, the way these stats work is when an auction is pulled and not rescheduled, it counts as a nil result because obviously it didn't actually go to auction and didn't get sold. So that's why you're seeing Melbourne is dragging down the national average here. You can see Sydney is still hot at 84%, whereas Melbourne at 44%. If you're wondering why, I'm going to pause for a second. Everyone who's been joining or watching the replays, write it on a bit of paper, yell it at your partner, whatever it is. What's the reason why we're seeing that big disparity between the two states? I'm sure if I could hear everyone, you'd be saying because of inspections. You're 100% right. Obviously in Melbourne, we are banned. If you leave your house, you open your front door, our Premier is standing there staring at you, so you were not allowed to go and have a look. And despite the rhetoric that's out there, no one is spending $300, $400, $500, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $10 million on a home that they've never seen. Whereas in Sydney, you are allowed to continue to do inspections. And obviously that's seeing their market continue to transact at a much higher level than what we're seeing in Melbourne. Typically, you don't get these same fluctuations because people reschedule an auction. They're obviously pulling it here because, as I said, in the foreseeable future, we don't see much light at the end of the tunnel in terms of these inspections coming back for at least until the end of this month, possibly moving into next month. So hence people are just pulling them, waiting until there's some certainty and then moving forward with it. And that's where I think as these auctions that have been scheduled and the data providers have all got start to peter out, you're obviously going to see Melbourne's auction rate jump back up to where it was, clearance rate jump up to where it was before and start to normalise a little bit more. Probably maybe next week, the week after, we'll start to see that happening. Okay, second index that I want to talk about and pump you with a bit more information is realestate.com's weekly buyer demand index, and they also do a renting index. So both of these indexes are key insights into, sorry, I was just trying to clear my screen because I can't see this index. I'm going to have to look back here with you. So these are two indexes that look at what is going to or, what are they seeing activity on the website? And we typically say this gives you an idea. Whatever is happening here is an indication of what to expect in the next 6 months or so in terms of transactions. I apologise, I'm now stuck and cannot seem to use my screen. Hopefully that will work. Are we moving? Okay, good. So this is the national index here. This compares to a baseline, this dotted line you can see here, which is 2019. So obviously you can see we're significantly above that. Big dip here is during the normal typical Christmas shutdown period. And then obviously well elevated to the average in 2019. It's been relatively stable that we're seeing here. And all of this peak demand that we were seeing in this period at the start of the year is what we saw in the last few months of transactions occurring. That is people researching, finding it, and then transacting. It's been, as you can see, relatively flat for the last few months, dipping off a bit. Obviously, lockdowns are starting to take their bite. As we said, particularly if we move forward to Melbourne, here you can see big drop. So a big difference between where we saw the national one, dropping off a bit, but relatively flat. We move forward to Victoria, you can see it's dropped down significantly. And that, of course, is, as I said, related specifically to the fact that we're not allowed to do any inspections whatsoever here. So people are pretty much saying, well, what's the point of me even wasting my time window shopping on the internet? I'm not necessarily sure that's the right thing if you are looking at buying. We did talk about it last week that you should be focused and using this time wisely, but of course, that's what the general public is doing there. If we move forward to the rent index, this one's obviously a little bit harder to garner the same level of insight as we see from the sale index, given how easy it is for people to move through homes. And in the main capital cities that drive this index, being Sydney and Melbourne, we're not seeing the same level of demand because we don't have students, we don't have overseas migration, and the vast majority of the people that are demanding that live, work and play in the city have lost their jobs or been temporarily stood down and typically have moved back home with mum and dad, and hence we're seeing a lot of less demand in there. However, obviously the activity is still going along above where it was in 2019, which to us is a shock. We wouldn't expect to see that, but obviously I think this is because people are moving and still moving house every 6 months. What do we see here in our local market? Obviously, a lot more choppy. Going through here. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to move the camera because I can't see my screen. I'm just going to move it myself, sorry. Sorry about that, guys. I was just wanted to make sure I was on screen, and one of my kids walked in. I was trying to get them to move the camera, but obviously it didn't work. So yeah, look, as we can see, I don't think you can read too much into this if you are an investor. What I will just say, if you are on the line and you are a renter, now is as good a time as any to be getting a deal, and don't expect that to last, because obviously once we start to get those vaccination rates up, lockdowns are going to become a thing of the past, hopefully, and we're going to see the rental market move significantly from there. All right, that's it. That's the information section. It was short, it was sharp. I told you we'd pummel you with a ton of information. Want you to be ready thinking about your questions, start putting them in the Q&A, so you're top of the queue. For those of you that didn't catch at the start, my name is James Maitland. I'm the General Manager here at Salvo. I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I've helped create more than 11,500 homes for people just like you on the line today. Salvo, what are we all about? Well, we've got a ton of different businesses, but ultimately every single business we have, our primary focus is all about helping create homes for people. So it doesn't matter where you are on that scale. If you're right at the start of that journey and just looking to rent a home for the first time, we can help you. If you're a seasoned investor with your third or fourth investment property, we can help you. First home buyer, we can help you. Everything we do today, doesn't matter where you are on that journey, it's all about helping you create a home. And I guarantee you'll get value if you're involved, you're active, and you participate. You will leave today's session with a ton of value and hopefully a plan how to move forward and to fast forward your journey to the next step. All right, so on the panel today, we're joined by Greg Arbeck, Jack Jan, and Lucas Karras. Wealth of experience amongst these guys, and they will be answering all of your questions. I, of course, will be moderating and taking the host. So pump all those questions in. We love it. This is what we do. Be active, be involved. That is how you will get value out of today's session. How do you ask the questions? Two ways. You can either raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or alternatively, put it in the Q&A. That's how everyone loves doing it. Easy for me. I read your questions while someone's asking the previous one. But of course, if you are brave, feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you. All right, that's it. Let's get stuck into part two. So those of you that are tuned out, now is the knowledge section. Focus, get involved, turn off your phone, put it on silent, put away the distractions, start putting all those questions in, listen to what people are asking, ask follow-on questions, and that is how you will get value out of today. So first cab off the rank, and this is in no particular order, but I did see quite a few questions popping up as I went through. Of course, we've talked about lockdowns. Prices seem to still be getting higher and higher and higher. A lot of people have said, you know, lockdowns, prices should be going down. That's not the case. Can someone tell us, you know, what's the latest stats? I know we've just had end of month from CoreLogic. I think at our last session, we didn't go through in detail. What have we seen around the countryside, particularly with a focus on our hometown, Melbourne here? You know, what have we seen? And perhaps if you're ready for it, tell us why aren't we seeing them drop? You know, what are some of the reasons for that?
Yes, James. We're happy to say the property value are rising, and despite the lockdown in the two biggest cities, Melbourne and Sydney, and almost the rest of the country, like the other cities, we all had seen that they got the snap, the lockdown or whatever. So according to the data from the CoreLogic, the Sydney home value rose another 1.8% in August. Even the city was in the second month of the lockdown. And in Melbourne, and we know that the physical inspection are not allowed under the current restriction, but the property value still rose 1.2% in August, which is very good.
So for August, just to put in perspective for everyone, we were locked down for the entire month of August here in Melbourne, but we've still seen 1.2% increase in property prices, which, given there was no inspections, is pretty good result.
Yes, exactly. So
tell us why.
If you're asking the reason, I would say it's very simple, because the more people is looking to buy, then the people looking.
I'll tell you what, Jack, I can see someone, Robert said yes, tell us why. Anthony, Jessica, Patricia, everyone online. So I reckon everyone wants to know why. Give them your words of wisdom, explain it to them.
We know if the property price is going to increase, it's just because of the demand of the supply. So it's simply speaking, is more people looking to buy than people looking for sale. So another data from the CoreLogic, so over the past 3 months, the number of the home sales has been 30% above the average. And also the number of the listing is almost 30% below the average. This is the main reason to push the price up. And
so it's a supply and demand story, is it? There's limited supply and higher demand than normal.
Yes, and also I think it's the people also asking, because of lockdown, why the people looking to buy? I think for this time we had the lockdown, and why the people were still looking to buy and rush into the market, I think is 4 reasons there. So the first one is, we're seeing the lots of the buyers who have to keep their job during the lockdown and are willing to buy because the historic low interest rate, and they have the big saving during the period from last year because they couldn't spend the money on the holiday, on the other things. That's the first one. The second one, I will say.
So Jack, do we say that's a little bit like Scrooge McDuck rolling around in a bathtub full of money? No one's gone on overseas holidays. They've now got all this money, low interest rates. They've just got to get out and spend it.
Yes, yes.
I think that's like Lucas's wife when she goes shopping every time he gets paid each month. She goes and spends it all at Myer and Grace Brothers.
Yes, that's the first one. I think the second one is this time the buyers is more confident than the last year when we have the first or second lockdown, because the people, they all realize the lockdown wouldn't go forever. As soon as we hit the vaccine target, everything will be reopened. So this makes them more confident to put the money on the deposit to buying the property which they want. And the third reason is because while the people looking to buy, there is less people to looking for sale. Different with last time we was in lockdown in last year. So because we have the support from the government and the mortgage holiday and also the low interest rate, which all help the homeowners to not selling. Because last time we might see some sort of like the forced sale and distressed sale, but this time it's a lot more less. So on the market, we wouldn't say more, the listing, like we said, the listing level is 30% below the average. So this makes the price up. And the last one, I think, is this time, most of the buyer, they learn from the last time, because once the lockdown ends, the price will take off. Like the early this year, when we ended the last lockdown, the price is going crazy. So then they're thinking, okay, my entering into the market now, which is the best timing before the lockdown end, the price take off.
Okay. So, I guess traditionally, spring is always a big selling period. We know that that's when, a vast majority of homeowners go and list their property. We're now the 8th of September, so 8 days into it. What are we actually seeing? Are we getting a big influx of listings? Or, I'm guessing, particularly here in our hometown, that's not the case, because I've run through with the auction results and everyone pulling it. So what are we expecting for spring?
Well, James, if you're echoing exactly what you've said, we've actually seen in Melbourne that there's been a reduction of nearly 17.5% of less listings, people not listing their property. They've rather going, let's just wait, put it on hold. And then echoing what Jack was talking about, that has created more demand than what there is supply. So on theory, hopefully, which is the case, that our Premier lets us start doing open or not open, but one-on-one inspections from around the 23rd or later this month, that pent-up demand, I think we'll start seeing a good spring clearance rate and a good season ahead of us. That's if we go on what has happened before.
Okay. So would it be fair to say for everyone on the line today, that we imagine most real estate agents that are advising their customers as to whether they should list and when they should list are pretty much going to be driven by inspections. Once we're able to inspect properties here in our local market, that we're going to see an influx of listings that's going to help to soak up that pent-up demand, and spring will still be a relatively high volume of transactions occurring.
That's what we foresee, James. I mean, as you mentioned, people need to view a home. So the moment we can start doing those one-on-ones, that momentum will continue, and I think we're going to have a good season ahead of us. It might extend further into summer, but it'll be a late spring sprung, put it that way.
Okay. And I think, Greg, from memory, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this before spring was upon us. Yeah. And we still had hope that we were getting out of lockdown in the near future. And I think you explained that the grass is greener in spring, not so green in summer, but if need be, you can keep going. And I guess, we're not going to have as big a holiday period perhaps here, particularly in Melbourne, given that we're going to probably lose most of this month, if not all of it, the first month of spring, that might just move that traditional 3-month selling period to starting a month later, but going a month longer.
And then as you talk about rose-coloured glasses, we'll give them with green-coloured glasses as they start coming in,
I love it. There you go. So for anyone thinking of listing their home in November, that's now going to move to December, possibly January, and they're worried about the grass not looking so green, Greg says, just put on a pair of green glasses and it'll look fantastic. Or you can always get fake grass, I guess, Greg. That's another solution. It looks good all the year round.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I saw a question from Daniel before. I've sort of got a recollection of it. I did mention about the value of residential property, and we often get asked these questions from, I guess, particularly investors and as well, investors that are coming from other countries in terms of they're very focused about the different asset classes. So, should I be investing in shares, in property, commercial property, just putting it in bonds, whatever it is. And they always like to look at that asset allocation. Now, I know we mentioned, I think it was only a few months ago, that we just smashed through the value of residential property in Australia, the $8 trillion mark. I think we're about to, or at least CoreLogic reckons we're going to break another barrier in the next couple of months. What's their prediction, and why are we seeing such strong growth?
Yes, James, and the CoreLogic has predict in the next couple of months, the total value of the Australian residential real estate will be over the 9 trillion, which in May, we just reached the 8 trillion and to 8.1 trillion, I believe. And I think this is mainly driven by the surging price from the two biggest cities in Melbourne and Sydney. Because we see the data, we were saying the Sydney and the Melbourne's residential real estate market individually worse more than the rest of the state and the capital city market is total. So, and the total value of...
Jack, can you give us an idea of those numbers? Because I've read them, but I think everyone on the line would love to know. If you missed it, Jack's about to tell you, but what he said before is that Sydney and Melbourne individually are worth more than the rest of the capital cities around the country. So for those of you that are ever thinking, where should I be investing in the depth of markets and so forth, just remember that. Now, Jack, hit us with the numbers to sort of boggle people's minds as to how big the Sydney and Melbourne markets are.
Yes, James. According from the CoreLogic, the total value of the residential real estate in Sydney was worth 2.53 trillion at the beginning of this year. And the Melbourne's total was 1.74 trillion at the beginning of the year. The third place, which is Brisbane, is only 626 billion. So either Melbourne or Sydney individually worth the total of the rest capital city and the state. Yeah.
Look, and I think for those of you that are sort of just thinking, so exactly what does that mean? If I just remind you, if you look at these figures here, hopefully I can get all the way back. We talked about it before. Whenever we look at the auction results, it's a 2-horse race. This is driven by Melbourne and Sydney. Melbourne's typically been the auction capital of Australia. with a close second with Sydney, and everywhere else is not even coming close. So you can see, even though the rest of the country is not in lockdown, Melbourne and Sydney basically had the entire volume of auctions. As Jack said, the second biggest capital city by value is Brisbane, with only 157 auctions. So not even, or roughly 10% of the total. Sydney and Melbourne together took up the vast majority of that, and that's why they're locked down. I don't have it here, but if we flick back to pre-lockdown, so the glory days of, say, June. In fact, no, Melbourne was in lockdown then. Maybe Melbourne wasn't in lockdown. I could be wrong again, but who knows? You'll see that Sydney and Melbourne were always hitting what we call a Super Saturday, more than 1,000 auctions each, and the rest of the country would be lucky to be getting to 500 combined. So, really important to remember that in terms of where the transaction's happening, that it's very much driven by these two markets. So those of you that are thinking, how do I take that information into knowledge? Well, the key thing is just remember, the bigger the depth of the market, the more buyers there are, the more sellers there are, and the more chance you are of being able to actually exit that property at the prices you want, as opposed to being in a smaller market. Very much what we talk about when we refer to regional markets versus capital city markets. Whilst they've got a big talking of late, obviously we're very conscious that it's easy to get high statistics, but when you've got a small pool of buyers and sellers, when it does come time to sell, if it's not a boom time, it can be very, very much harder. Okay, so 9 trillion, we're about to hit it. That leads me to an interesting next topic. Obviously, all of us here on the panel, Greg should have retired about 10 years ago, but we can't hold him down. He continues to tell us that he feels younger and younger every day. The rest of us have all got families. We've all been able to get a vaccine jab for a long, long time. So that tells you we're all older than 40 because we've been able to get that there. So, you start to think more and more about retirement. What does that mean? You become a lot more sensible financially. And of course, one of the biggest single pools or sources of money that we have is our superannuation. Obviously, the family home typically is the biggest, and obviously what we most successfully tend to find is our best performing asset, and we love it. Residential real estate is what we're built on in Australia. So when it comes to super, some of us are lazy and we're happy leaving our super with one of the big managers, preferably not AMP, but someone else, and they manage it and do it, and it takes no time and effort. Those of you that prefer to have a little bit more control may have looked or may have what's called a self-managed super fund. That is, you are master of your own money. You choose where it's invested. You decide how it goes and where it should be invested. So you're effectively planning for your own retirement. Now, what do most people want to do? Well, they want to follow what they do outside of super. So that is invest in residential real estate. So, we've seen a ton of people that have got an investment property which they brought through super fund, and they own their family home outside of super. Seems like a great idea, and I know it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. I think it was probably more than a decade ago that the rules changed and you were able to borrow in your super fund specifically to buy a residential property. That being said, there are a ton of rules. It is quite a specialist area. And despite being a chartered accountant, I don't profess to be an expert in there. So Lucas has been doing a fair bit of work on this. I know he's had a lot of buyers recently buying their super fund. So Lucas, perhaps can you sort of explain to people as to how they might buy, but where are some of the traps that they've got to look out for, and what are some of these key rules so that this dream of a happy retirement with residential real estate doesn't turn out to be a nightmare?
Yes, James. Look, like you said, super fund, buying through a self-managed super fund, it's a great idea. The low borrowing interest rates, the continuously increasing housing prices, and also the interest that the funds are receiving is so low. So a lot of people buy property using the super. So it's very important to know, yes, it's quite easy to do, but there's a lot of rules and regulations around it of what you can and cannot do. And I give you an example, which I had a buyer that had this happen to him. He wanted to buy for his daughter, and he was going to buy an investment. His daughter was going to live there. She was going to pay the market value. But guess what? That is not allowed. You're not allowed to rent your property to anybody that's in any way related to you, even somebody that works for you. They're not allowed to. there is an exception to the rule, unless it's a farm. But let's face it, not many people, that doesn't apply to many people.
Yeah.
So it's quite simple. So self-managed super fund, like you said, can apply for a loan to buy a house, a townhouse, or an apartment. As we said, the lease has to be to an uninvolved party, and the property must also solely provide retirement benefits to fund members.
So I think that was a really important point. So just sort of make sure everyone's got that. You know, for the vast majority of people, you know, you're always thinking, what can I do to, you know, look after my family? How can I do the best? So for most of us with young kids, we think, all right, well, let's buy a property. Let's try and help them get on that ladder early, particularly thinking, okay, well, what about if I buy a property and make them into the tenant, help subsidize the rent, they can look after it. You can't do that in super. And I think that's a trap that we probably would all fall into. So, you know, I think that's really, really important. And because there's pretty big penalties if you do that, Lucas, isn't there? I think you get all the money taxed at the top rate or something, don't you?
That's 100% right. And look, and I tell you, at least 60% of the people, if not higher, that are buying are telling me the same story. I'm going to buy, let my, you know, my son or my daughter is going to uni. She's going to live there, pay me the rent. I didn't even know about it until I looked into it. So yeah, it's a very common trap. Now, just to sort of move on, some people, this is another big trap. Some people will buy it in the country or by the seaside, thinking, you know what, when retirement age arrives, I'll just go and live there for the rest of my life. Now, that's great. You can do that. However, the asset is still in the name of the fund. And once you are at a retiring age and you want to move into it, you can do it, but you have to buy it, pay the current market value, and pay stamp duty on top. So it means you probably have to sell the family home where you're living, and the money you get to that, if you want to move into your super fund house, you have to buy that and pay stamp duty as well. So that's another tricky one that people don't realize.
Okay.
People
so,
think,
yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, people think, okay, I'm going to be retiring age. That means I can move into it. It's not that simple.
So I think, you know, to break it down simply, most people would think, okay, it's my property. I'm now retired. This is my retirement fund. I'll just go and live in the property. And whilst you're saying that's okay, you effectively need to rob Peter to pay Paul. You need to take money outside of super to buy the property off your super fund, to take it back out so you can go and live in it, which I guess, you know, probably isn't the worst thing because, you know, it's all your money, but you're obviously going to need to make sure that, you know, you don't go and start living in it before you've transferred it from one to another. And I guess maybe for some people, you'd rather be paying the capital gains tax to yourself than buying it off the third party at the time, because I guess you're at least making money for yourself in one way or another.
Now, when it comes to borrowing money through your super to buy a property, people should be aware that the interest rates for the super funds is slightly higher than your normal rates. So currently, you're looking at about 4% as an interest rate. However, the super fund can borrow up to 80% and for 30 years. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the tax side of things. So the self-managed super fund is required to pay 15% of tax on rental income generated for the property. However, if you do keep the property for more than 12 months, the fund receives a 1/3 discount on any capital gains made upon selling the property, which means that capital gain tax liability is down to just 10%.
Okay, so where we would typically be saying, all right, at the top tax rate, you're losing half your rental money to tax, and then from a capital gain point of view, you're losing a quarter. That must be why people love the idea of having in super, because you're, you know, paying only 15% of your rent money in tax, and then only an effective 10% of the capital gain when you do decide to sell it to the taxman.
That's right. Now, furthermore, if you borrow any money to complete the purchase, the interest payments are tax deductible to the fund. And if the expenses exceed the income, the taxable loss is carried forward to the next year and to the next year until there's a future taxable income that is high enough to be offset. Now, once the trustees start receiving a pension or retirement, any rental income or capital gains arising from the fund will be tax-free. Very important piece of information here, though. There is a cap, which is $1.6 million. Now, this is why I find so many people come to buy an apartment, because they know they'll still be under the cap. You go and buy a house for 1.8 million, well, there's no benefit there really for that.
Okay. So what you're saying is if, let's say you're in your late 40s, early 50s, you buy an apartment for, say, $500,000. 15 years later, you're in your late 60s, you retire, you move into pension phase with your super fund. Property's now doubled, it's worth $1 million. You can effectively sell that property and have that capital gains tax-free.
Correct. Correct. So it's very, very important because people think...
Sign me up, my friend. I'm in.
Yeah, well, exactly, because people think, all right, I'm not going to pay any tax or whatever, but there is a cap. Not everybody knows that. It's $1.6 million. Now, finally, another important thing that people need to be aware of, that if you do decide to do any major improvements or renovations, that is allowed, but you cannot use the money, you cannot borrow money to do that. You have to use money that's already available in the super fund, okay? And also your loan repayments must be made from your self-managed super fund, which means you must always have available funds in there to meet the loan repayments. And you can use things like your income from your rental of the property, or you can do super contributions to the fund to assist you with this.
Okay. So obviously, I guess, particularly during shocks like we've had now with Corona, and you might have extended periods of vacancy, you need to make sure that you haven't overextended yourself and you've got some free cash flow in the super fund or income coming in from other sources so that you can keep making those mortgage payments while you're finding a tenant.
Yeah. And look, and lastly, James, quite interesting, there's not a set amount of how much money has to be in your super for you to use and buy property, but all the banks work, and all the funds work roughly of $200,000 at least. So as long as you have approximately $200,000 or more on your super fund, you can do this.
Okay. So for simple maths, you probably need to have waited until you've earned a cumulative $2 million across your working life. And at 10% in super, that'll give you about that 200 grand.
Yeah.
All right. So you'll do that in about 6 months. Yeah.
I mean, hopefully 5.5.
Okay. Good. All right. I just want to pick up, I know we've gone a bit over time, but I want to pick up on something that Lucas mentioned there. And just quickly, if someone's got something on it, residential vacancy rates, lockdowns, obviously having an effect, maybe. Melbourne, we've seen sort of vacancy grow a little bit over the last couple of months, whereas Sydney, that's been locked down for a little bit longer, stayed flat. Is that right? And why are we sort of seeing the differences between the two states?
Well, as we've said before, James, you can't lease something that you can't see. So the fact that we cannot even show property, we can't do anything, has had an effect on Melbourne, whereas Sydney has continued to track quite well at 2.6 vacancy at that side. Melbourne was actually tracking quite well, but it has regressed a bit to about 3.8%. It was 3.7 last month. So yes, there is. It hasn't dived, but we are seeing the lockdown is having an effect on our rental. Absolutely.
Okay, so it's obviously not a blowout, but I guess we were starting to see it track gradually down. Yep. That's now reversed and started to go up a little bit. And I guess as well, probably not only are we not able to go and inspect properties, but Sydney, whilst everyone who's only ever lived in Sydney would say this is the worst thing ever and it's terrible, but for those people that are in Melbourne, this is lockdown number 6. We've been at this for almost 2 years now. I guess you get a little bit weary and you say, like, enough's enough. I'm
Yep.
not going to waste my time. So that's probably biting a bit more as well.
So it is biting. Definitely the lockdowns have bit Melbourne the hardest. There is no doubt. The good thing is that we did see an upward trend, but the latest month has definitely lowered that a bit. But hopefully, we'll start seeing it getting back to normal as and when we can start to, contracting again.
Okay, good. All right. We've gone way over time. I think this potentially could be one of our longest over time. So for those of you that had other things planned, I apologize. If you're still on the line, then hopefully we were delivering you value, and that's why you're still here. So before you go, I just want to give you a roadmap as to where I believe is the next logical steps for you to move forward, and to really, fast track your journey through that home ownership life cycle. As I said, it doesn't matter where you are. I believe we can help you fast track that journey to the next step. So today we've shared a lot of value. Those of you that got involved, thank you very much. And hopefully you've got a ton of knowledge. You're further down that process. But what's going to happen from here? Well, we've been doing this a long time. And let me tell you, I can tell you there is 3 paths that you will all go down. The vast majority of you will go down the first path. And that is you'll do nothing with what you've learned today. You'll say that was great, but I'm busy. I've got something else to do. You'll forget about this and it will be a distant memory until perhaps you see one of our emails and you join us again. You say, oh yeah, that was good. And then you'll probably do nothing about it. Now, for most of you, that's fine. If that's how you want to go, then, for some of you, that's okay. But as I said, I just want to be clear, if you are trying to move along that journey, you are trying to get to the next step in creating a home for yourself, if you keep doing the same thing, then don't expect a different result. So you've been at it for a while and you still haven't brought your home, then I just suggest you perhaps need to make some changes so that you can actually move forward, because you need to get in, you need to take that proactive action and move forward. So the second path that some of you will go down is you'll say, that's great. I got the kick up my ass. I've learned a few things here. I understand what I've got to do. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to go out. I'm going to take what I've learned and do it myself. And that's great. And I love you guys for that. And I'm really, really happy for you. But what I hope you do, and what I think is the best path, is do it with us. As I said, here at Salvo, we're all about helping create homes. And it doesn't matter which one of our many businesses might be the right fit for you. We can help you fast track that journey. And that's what the smart people do. They realize that if they can get to that next step faster, they can have more time in the market, they can move forward, and they can shorten that life cycle in terms of what they can do by themselves. So that's what I really hope that most of you today think about it before you go down path 1. If you're going to do path 2, great. But particularly if you're thinking about path 1, think about it and perhaps consider path 3. Now, this concept of actionable knowledge, the system and the method that we use, it's not going to be for everyone. So, I can't say it's going to work for everyone, and I can't say that everyone's going to be a right fit. But if this sounds like you're prepared to take action, you're motivated to actually move forward, you've embraced what we've done today, you've asked questions, you've got involved, you want to increase that knowledge so you can see those signs and take that step, and you're prepared to put in the effort and roll up your sleeves and do the work, then I guarantee you'll be a good fit for us. We can't help everyone, but if that sounds like you, then what I suggest you do, the next logical step, I've thought long and hard about it. Everyone's busy, everyone's skeptical. They're saying, oh, look, this just sounds like a selling scheme, a pyramid scheme. Yeah, how can you help me, whatever it is? Well, that's fair enough. But what I'm asking you to do is make the smallest possible commitment, which is 15 to 20 minutes of your time. That is nothing. That's as long as it might take you to drink your first morning coffee. And I still believe we can get a realistic result with you. So what I've done is I've set aside time in everyone's diaries over the next 5 days, specifically for these 15 to 20 minute phone calls, Zoom meetings, FaceTime calls. Hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to meet up with you face to face. And really, it's very, very straightforward. Not a big commitment from you. Typically we'll just have a quick chat about what's going on in the market, any other questions that you might want to ask that you didn't get answered before, and then where you are in the journey and where you're hoping that you can get. And then we can really sort of say, well, this is how we believe we can help you take those next steps and how you might fit together with us. Minimal commitment, but I guarantee you'll get a ton of value if you put the time and effort into it. So if that sounds like something you are prepared to, commit that small amount of time, how do you do it? There's 3 ways to do it. First one, jump in the chat. If you're on Zoom, you'll see the link in the chat. You can book that right now. Second option, your web browser, when you logged into Zoom, should have redirected you to that booking page. Jump on there. Lastly, for those of you that are on Facebook, I haven't put that on there. You should be able to see it in our bio somewhere, a link to be able to go in and book that. And those of you that did register here, we'll send you a follow-up email with a link. You can choose the right time. So if you do want to take the next step, invest that time in yourself, book one of those sessions, and I guarantee that you'll get value out of it. So before we go, I just want to tell you a little story. So it was last school holidays, before lockdown 5, before lockdown number 6 here in Melbourne, and I got away for 4 or 5 nights to Hamilton Island with the family. We had a great time, albeit we landed back here in Melbourne and went into lockdown 5 the next day, and we all wished, why didn't we stay in there? But when we were there, I had a great time with the kids. We were in the water, it was warm, it was nice, it was great. On the second night, my eldest daughter Isabella said to me, "Dad, I'd love to go and see the sunrise tomorrow morning. Can we walk to the top of that mountain we've been looking at in the distance, get up there before the sun rises, watch the sunrise, and come down and wake Mum and Ivy, her younger sister, up and have breakfast?" I said, "That sounds like a fantastic idea, let's do it." Just before I went to go to bed, I jumped on Google, had a quick look, when does the sun rise? And to my surprise, 4:45 a.m. Now, we know one of the precious things about being on holiday is being able to sleep in. So I was about to say to her, "Isabella, I don't want to get up that early. Can we just do it another time?" But before I did, I thought how excited she was. And, these moments are far and few between. Becoming a teenager, she spends more time hating Mum and Dad and in her room on her phone doing God knows what. So I thought, nah, I've got to do it. Got up my iPhone, set 3 or 4 alarms, put it, went to bed. What felt like no more than 15 minutes later, I heard the of my alarm. What did I do? The big, round, big snooze button. I hit snooze, rolled over and went back to bed. A couple of minutes later, I realized what I'd done. I got up and I said, "You know what? She's so excited about it. Don't hit snooze. Apple should have made it harder to do it." I stopped the alarm. I woke her up. We ran to the top of the hill. We saw the sunrise. It was spectacular. We had a great time. That was the view. That was her excitement. And it really, really was one of those special moments. But like me, most of you will know how easy it is to hit the snooze button, particularly in lockdown. We're doing that constantly and waking up about 2 minutes before we've got to jump onto our first Zoom meeting or, log into our first work call. But just remember this, every time you hit snooze, you're missing out on certain things. So had I have left the snooze button, had I have stopped it and not gone, I wouldn't have had this great memory. I wouldn't have had that fun time with my daughter, which is something that I'll always sort of treasure. So you've got to just remember, it's those people that are prepared to take the action, that don't hit snooze, don't hit stop, that actually get these memories, get things done, move forward, buy that next home, get that investment property, move out of Mum and Dad's home. Whatever it is, it's the people that are prepared to take that action that will get the results. So I want to leave you with that thought. Remember, every time you hit snooze and say, "I'm going to do it later," someone else is going to get in front of you in that queue. They're going to get the results. They're going to be moving forward and you're going to be getting left behind. So book one of those sessions. As I said to you, it's a small commitment and I guarantee you'll get some value out of it. So that is it from me and everyone here on the panel. Thank you so much for your time today. Those of you that stuck around, I apologize for going way over time. Hopefully we delivered some value and you got a ton of information out of today's session. We will be here every Wednesday as always at 2:30. So from me and everyone on the panel, thank you for your attendance today and we look forward to seeing you again next week or next month.